and then you would pray, and hopefully the machine would come up after a reboot. Um, we also wanted to reduce our risk register and to improve security through that, future-proofing our landscape, and then increase performance, which is quite a weird one because we were always told that we had the best CPUs, the highest gigahertz per CPU, and so forth. And it wasn't a lie, it's true. But having a very fast gigahertz CPU, it's very good for a single thread. But most of our systems nowadays have multi-thread. So going over to the Intel chip CPU was actually a revelation for us. And I'll show you right at the end when I show you the successes. And then innovation, we felt that going to the cloud would be great for innovation. All right, the pitfalls. Pitfalls, traps, and other things. So when we start to think about anything within cloud, there are always these three components that works against each other. So what I'm trying to say is that if I want to improve security, I most likely will have to increase cost, and it will also reduce innovation. And those three are continuously pulling away from each other. So the first thing that will happen, by the way, this is a ABAP developer, well, not just a ABAP, it's a developer once they realize what all the services are that are available on AWS. They become like a kid in a candy store. They just want, and they'll give you a hard time in order to give them the access to these services. And if your structures and access is not set up correctly, you are going to have a difficult time. In actual fact, my theory is that if you don't have it correctly set up, you will stifle innovation because you will curb their excitement if you don't give them the access. But if you give them the access, what will happen is you will open up areas of risk as well. Because the people, they don't really know what they're doing. They spin up machines, and the cost of a machine can be very, very expensive. I'll give you an example. The BW system, our BW system, it's not a secret. Like I said, it's got 12 servers, 2 terabytes each. If we snap those systems, we make a new copy of that machine, it costs us 25,000 Rand per day to keep that machine burning. So if you have a developer that decided he wants to do something like that, spin it up, just want to check something, but he forgets to switch it off, you can have a nasty bill at the end of the month. So one of the first things I want to bring across is we were grappling with this idea for quite some time before we started, and that was, should we have multiple accounts or one account and multiple VPCs? Now I know I'm talking in IT acronyms here. So AWS, which is the frame of reference that I have now, and I know that Azure works fairly similar, it's got the concept of accounts. An account is a logical grouping of your servers, and your costs is linked to an account. Or you can have one account and have these virtual private networks inside of it, and then have one account. The problem for us is not a problem, but what we thought eventually the better way of doing it is the top one, the accounts. And the reason for it is the benefits of grouping your costs. So when we have a department that wants to spin up something and they've got some innovative idea, we create them an account, we can let them loose there, but all of their costs is then bubble wrapped within that area. So at the end of the month, it's very easy for me to out of there, and you can believe me, 100,000 line item invoice that you get from AWS, you need to know which line items is exactly for. And remember, you can't just say, I want that machine's cost. The machine has got costs surrounding it, like the disks, everything, network cost, whatever. It's attached to that machine. Instead of using tags, because tags is important. Tags is like a little, exactly what it says, it's like a little flag that you can link to each and every component within a server or within a service. And then you can say, I want all the cost for that tag, but it becomes very cumbersome to manage all of that. So what we've said is we rather want to isolate departments or areas through accounts. So the example I have there is we've got a payers account, so all the costs will flow into the payers account. From there you can see everything. You can also drill down to only the cost of an account, and it's very easy for me now to go and say to our online team, hey, you've cost X amount this month, here's the bill, give me the money. We also would have something like a core account, which is a share account where you put all of your services that you would share among all of your accounts. So isolating access areas, what we're just saying there is that if your account gets compromised, the blast area will be a lot smaller, where with the VPC option, your blast area is a lot bigger. You would have an increase in admin with the accounts option, but I think the benefits outstrips the downside. And then from a integration point of view, yes, it is more complex to integrate your services and systems with the accounts option. And then my feeling is that it's easier to encourage innovation by giving your development team, or whichever team it is, an area to say, hey, go and knock yourself out in this area. Where if it's just in a, let's say in a development, a greater development area, it's much harder to contain them. All right, FinOps. I think I heard the word yesterday as well. So I know last night was quite a heavy night for most of you, and you might feel like you fall asleep. So please take a deep breath and so forth. I know these slides are hellishly boring, but I couldn't find a different way of showing it to you. So I want to talk about reduced and controlled cost. So the first section, cost models. Before you start with your cloud journey, I think the first thing you need to do is understand the cost models that any of the cloud providers have. AWS in this case, I want to start from the bottom up. They've got a spot instances. It's not something I'll use for a production instance, but they've got access capacity, and what they do is then they make this capacity available at very cheap prices. The catch is that when they require that capacity, they will give you a 2-minute warning, and then they'll pull the plug from that machine. So it's not really something we use. On demand, that's pay as you go. I can't say it better than that. And then the other two models are reserved instances. So reserved instances, that's the way AWS used to work. They still have the option available, but basically you commit to a certain type of machine. So I want this family or this type of machine I want. I'm committing to buying it for, let's say, for a 3-year period. I'm not going to pay anything up front, or I'm going to pay the full amount up front, or I'm going to pay a partial amount up front to reduce my monthly fees or hourly fees. So those options are there. The problem is that if you decide to change the size of the machine, then you might be paying double. Why do I say that? Because if it's not in the same family, for instance, you automatically will start to pay on-demand prices, but you still have the commitment of the reserve instance. It's a contract at the end of the day. So savings plans were introduced, much better option. You're committing to a dollar value per hour, and you can move around between machines much easier. It's safer from that point of view. Right sizing and modernizing, this is an effort that we've implemented continuously within our area. So every month we go through the machines, we ensure that they have the right size, and there are continuously new machines coming out. This is such a big benefit from AWS, from the cloud providers. We didn't have that privilege before. So the cost of a new type of machine is not necessarily less. It's normally the same price, but you get more bang for your buck. So quite often I can reduce the size of the machine to get the same performance, and therefore, because I've got a reduced machine, I pay less. And if you're on a savings plan, you automatically get covered by that, and you can use the access of the savings plan somewhere else again as well. AWS also have a fair amount of tools. There might be suppliers here. There are a fair amount of tools in the market as well. I've found the tools that AWS has are sufficient at this point in time. Cost Explorer, fantastic tool. You can slice and dice and project a couple of months ahead what your costs will be. So that's fantastic. And then Trusted Advisor is also a cool thing because it will show you where your risks are. It gives you a value or a rating there, and it will also suggest new machines that you should use. And then the top one, sorry, I missed that one, AWS Compute Optimizer. I think it's a service that you pay for. It's actually very cheap, if I'm not mistaken. But it is, you'll make your money back within the first week. Because what they do is they go into detail of your usage pattern, and then they'll suggest new machines or a machine for you that's a better fit than what you might have. Just through that, you'll save loads of bucks. Monitoring and alerting. So it's somehow always the thing that you do last. I don't know why, but I think it's the thing that you need to do first. Is create your budgets. There's a concept of budgets where you can say, this is what I want to spend. If it's more than that, alert me, and so forth. And along with the monitoring is expiry dates of savings plans and RIs. Why do I say that? Because you don't tend to buy all of your RIs and all of your savings plans at the same time. They spread over time. So you tend to forget that 3 years ago, that savings plan I bought is going to expire within a month's time or so. And you can imagine if that happens without you knowing, you start to pay on-demand rates. And that can, again, give you a nasty surprise at the end of the month. So what we've also done is we've set up intraday anomalies. And the reason for it is I want our developers to be innovative, but I don't want to constrain them. And I think, once again, that is the balance. So if they start up something, it's fine within costing reason, if I can put it that way. But they tend to be so excited they forget about these things. So what we've done is we've set up these alerts and alarms for anomalies. Within the day, we get a trigger to say, hey, somebody spun up a X132 extra large. It's costing 5,000 Rand a day. What are you going to do about it? And then we can make contact with them. We can talk about it and see what's the reason behind it, and whether we should shut it down, or if there's a need for buying an additional savings plan or so. Zombie volumes. I'm not sure it's an official term. It's a term that we use. But when you spin up a machine, you normally tend to add additional volumes, storage volumes. And when you shut down the machine or you decommission the machine, the root volume will automatically be decommissioned as well, but not the volumes you've added additionally. So now what happens is, over time, you spun up these machines, and over time, your amount of volumes, which does not belong to any machine, hence zombie volumes, they start to add up and add up and add up. And you can see that in Cost Explorer, that your storage costs suddenly, it's just increasing over time. And a lot of people, I hate the saying, but a lot of people love to say, but storage is cheap. Yes, it is cheap, but it has a knock-on effect, because for storage, you need a backup. For the backup, you need a place to store the backup. Most probably it will be S3. And for backups, you don't just keep a day's backup, you keep like 30 days worth of backup. So now you have backups of zombie volumes that are there for at least 30 days as well. So it increases the cost quite drastically. So what we've done is we've got alarms for volumes that does not belong to a server, and we go and cull them. Governance, my favorite subject. I feel like we're being audited every second week. It's probably not true, but that's at least the feeling that I get. And if you go to cloud, you will be audited as well. And the auditors are not 100% au fait with the way cloud works yet. Okay, don't quote me on that, please. So I've gone and tried to find a framework for a governance point of view. There is no certified governance framework for cloud. They all tend to use frameworks and try and I can say not cross, but it's frameworks for on-premise stuff that they now try and make fit for cloud stuff. However, what I have found is the Open Group has got a framework. It's not certified yet. It's called the Cloud Computing Governance Framework. It's really good. It's a good place to start off. So please go and have a look at it. It will take you through the process of which processes to check and which checkers to put in place to check the process that should be there and so forth. And so we've got our weekly and monthly and quarterly reviews, etc. I was a bit hesitant to put this slide in, but I thought, what the hell. At this conference, I think the message that comes across quite often is there's this viewpoint of we're on-premise, we go to infrastructure as a service, we go to a platform as a service, and eventually we end up at software as a service. And if we do that, your costs will decrease. Now, let me tell you, I want to put it out there that I want you to challenge that idea whenever it comes across. Because what I've found is it's not true for all scenarios. There are scenarios, especially within retail, and the reason why I'm saying especially within retail is we have volume of stuff. So transactions are millions per day. Like I said, a BW system have got terabytes of data. So when it comes to volume, sometimes a SaaS offering blows out and it's cheaper to roll back to one of the other offers. All right, this is the periodic table of Amazon Web Services. Just give me a second, please. So the point I want to make here is that there are hundreds of services. There are actually more than 200, I got this off the website, more than 200 services within AWS, and I'm pretty sure within Azure it's a similar story. And every second week we get in mail and there's a list of more services. So we have all of these options. The way I see it is it's like tools in your bag that you have that you can use. But once again, we're at a SAP conference, and I tend to feel that our architects are the only thing they have in their bag of tools is a hammer. And then everything that you look at becomes a nail. And what I mean by a hammer is I don't think we should be just thinking of SAP as the only way to do things. There are so many offerings out there. And we need to empower our people in order to make use of these services. So what I found was that we're on ECC, we're not on S4HANA there as yet. But making use of those services was actually, it's a bit of a problem. It's not easy. That's why it's not a brain, it's a maze supposed to be. It's a bit of a problem to get there. So we, for instance, have a little program that saves photos of certain things onto storage, S3 storage. But the way we get to the storage is through the operating system. In other words, we have to go drop down to the operating system, call the CLI, then the servers, and drop it in there and so forth. And it's not slick. And I found that the developers, the ABAP developers and so forth, they weren't keen to make use of these other services. But there is this new thing called AWS SDK for ABAP. I think this is the best thing since sliced bread. So it's an SDK that lives within your SAP system, and now from ABAP you can call AWS services directly. You don't have to go through a portal, a gateway, a BTP service or whatever to call it. You can call these services directly. It's just a simple transport that you implement. It's got its own namespace. It's a little bit of configuration that's required, and then you can point and shoot to these services. So from an innovation point of view, we've been on cloud for about a year now, and we've seen some great reduction in costs and so forth. But the thing that I would like to see is a bit more of innovation. So you have the business, they've got a requirement, you've got your architecture people, and then you have your development people. And at the moment, what's happening is every problem that comes across their desk, they only think of SAP, the way to solve the issue. I think with this new way, we can actually open up more services, more ways of resolving problems faster, quicker, and even more and even cheaper. The steps I would suggest is get your developers and your architects to do the practitioner training. That's again AWS, that's my frame of reference. Get them to do the practitioner training just to get an idea of how it works. And then your solution architects, or your architects should do the solution architecture course to understand the different services that are available. And then put this SDK ABAP into your development system. Since we've done that, the developers just absolutely exploded with ideas. It's amazing, just because they've now have this way of easily calling these services. I made it available to them. I showed them the things. I showed them the AWS websites. They've now all in their own time, which I love. In their own time, they go and read up on these services, and they come back to me and say, hey, we can use it for this or for that. And I think that's the way of igniting your innovation within SAP and AWS services. All right. Lastly, the successes. I know somebody might pipe up and say, oh, we got one slide for successes and like a whole hog of slides for pitfalls. Let me just run you through it. So from a cost point of view, we managed to reduce our costs by 34%. I know that percentage is a relative term, 34% of what? Well, inside of that amount, you would see that would be all of our infrastructure. That's all of the infrastructure, including the network costs between your servers and so forth. The operating system costs as well. Backup and utilities. Do not underestimate the cost of backups. The tools are expensive. It's expensive to do backups as well. I'm not saying in cloud, I'm saying in general, so don't just put it to the side. Also, the archiving solution, we had to buy a new archiving solution. The cost was inside of that 34% as well. And then our point of sale installed databases as well. We've included that into that cost as well. Stability, we managed, like I said, those Lenovo machines from hell, they were chucked out. And we used to have HADR. For those who don't know how that works, is that's when you have two different systems, two databases, they're in sync. If there's an issue in the one, you have to manually roll over to the other machine. We've replaced that all with HA. In other words, it automatically switches over. And embarrassingly enough, it happened in the beginning where our systems had a failure. It switched over. We didn't even know about it. The basis team only picked it up a day or two afterwards. So we've put an alert in place to alert us when it actually switches over. And then a multi-AZ application service. So when you design systems for cloud, you'll hear this wherever you go when you talk about cloud. You design for failure. And so where we used to have 2 data centers at Pick n Pay, we now have multiple, if you want to put it that way. Our application servers are spread over these 3 AZs. So an AZ you can think of as a data center, spread over them. We have not seen a decrease in performance due to the fact that they are 50 odd kilometers away from each other. And we have the luxury now that a whole data center can go down. We won't even know about it. Performance, our batch jobs, I don't know if it's anywhere else like that, but within retail we have thousands of jobs. We run about 3,000 jobs a night. And the batch load, the nightly batch load used to be 3 hours. It's now 2.5 hours, and it's rock solid. It deviates by about a minute or so from day to day. Transaction speed. I'm going to say in general it's better because some were slower and some were better. The ones that were slower is forecasting and replenishment. I think we have somebody here that knows about that as well. Forecasting replenishment is a peculiar system because the application servers all share a similar file system where it actually sucks up the information, does the calculation and so forth. And what we did was we created a NFS share among the application servers. It was hellishly slow. We then bumped up the IOPS on those disks, and it was still slow. And then eventually we got to the Amazon FSx Lustre file system, and that increased the performance better than what we had on premise. Innovation, you've seen my spiel on that. I feel we've done some, but not enough. And then I feel that we've future-proofed our landscape by going into the cloud. I've mentioned the fact that new models are available every year. And then security. When we went into this project, one of the principles were that we will not bend on security. So I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of security groups, but security groups effectively just a little firewall that you can put servers into. And what we've done is, from the word go, we created these security groups, and we would only open ports if they were required. Yes, it was painful, because on AWS, if a security group blocks you, the symptoms is nothing. It doesn't show you anything. So it was painful, but I feel we have a much more secure environment now, where the application servers are separate from the database servers and so forth. And we've reduced our risk register through that as well. And lastly, I've mentioned the AWS Trusted Advisor as well. All right. That is it. Thank you very much. I see we've got like about 4 minutes left or so. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
What would the journey back typically look like?
Sorry, just to repeat yourself.
What hypothetically, if you were to one day wake up with the realization that the journey back is what has to happen, what does that look like?
Sure. So you're asking me, would I ever go back on premise?
Yeah.
I cannot see us going back on premise ever. But it would be very similar to the way we got there. You need to go through RFP process and so forth, get a partner, get the hardware and all of that. In actual fact, I think it would be easier going back, from the point that when we moved from on-premise, we were on AIX, and that has got big endian, and the systems in cloud are all little endian. And so what happened was we couldn't just back up and restore. We had to do export-import. From that point of view, yes, that's easier. What would be difficult, and I think this might be where you're leaning towards, is you sort of get tied in to a cloud provider. Yeah. And the tie-in is when you start making use of their specific services. But I can say the same of SAP. I can say the same of Azure. I can say the same of everything. But it's definitely, it is something in the back of my mind is, should we go multi-cloud? If we do go multi-cloud provider, and we make use of an ABAP SDK, how do I take that over to Azure, for instance? That is definitely something to think of. Okay. Sorry, it's the gentleman just behind you. Yeah, I think he had a question.
Yes, thanks. How do you manage the responsibility between you, SAP, and AWS, for example, as when you do an upgrade or when you have a fold?
Yes.
Or something else.
Okay. So the relationship between us and SAP has not changed. That's very stayed the same. going to AWS, we have a partner. I mentioned Lemongrass, so we log our calls and our issues through Lemongrass, and they would log it with AWS. However, we have a very close relationship with AWS as well. Their account managers are in our offices, I would say monthly or so, and I found them very helpful. Oh, this sounds like a plug for AWS, but I found them very helpful. One of the things you might think of is, what if there's an issue on the operating system or the machine itself? How would that handle, is it, because you might get it's the other guy's fault type of thing. And we've had an issue where some of the services died, the machines would die, and we logged calls with AWS for a long time, and they did go into a lab, they tested it and so forth. They came back and said that it's not them, and obviously we thought they were crazy. But eventually it was us, because we didn't configure the machines within the correct memory parameters available. So what I can say is I have not had an issue with the partnership between the three parties. Okay. We can make time. 1 minute.
Can you maybe expand on the cost reduction? What's the biggest drivers for the cost reduction? And then also specifically regarding your SAP licenses and the SAP license model.
SAP license model hasn't changed for us. There's been no change as far as I know. What was interesting on the SAP license model was the consumption model of SAP for PO. So PO's got a CPU license, and there's a specific way you have to calculate the CPU on a cloud platform. You can't just go and have a look what the vCPU is and take that as the number. So that was something special, but otherwise the license haven't changed. The cost reduction, I don't want to go into the details of the contract that we had, but because a lot of people can say, but you maybe came off a very high base. It's difficult to tell because we don't always know what the other people out there, what their costs were. But the costs were on hardware. From what I could see, hardware, that was one of the big costs, and storage. When I say hardware, I'm talking about the compute portion and storage as well. That was the two big players in our area.
Do you have any infrastructure left on premise?
The infrastructure that's left is network related. Just to get the information and data out of the head office into the cloud. But no, we don't. The data center is empty. All right. Okay. Seems like that's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.